I don't even know. It seemed like from the book you were almost just sort of like, okay, I guess you're just letting me be here for many days. Oh no, it's a week, it's 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks. Like, like kind of out of the, because as a, journalist, you would expect, maybe you get a few hours, at a very like, a controlled setting and things like that. But very quickly you started probably began to realize like, oh, this is like they're letting me hang.
Yeah. Uh, I've done hundreds of interviews with people of that, big movie stars and big rock stars and artists and all. And rarely since then, but up until that point, no one had ever opened up their lives in the way that Yoko and John did. Uh, yeah, most interviews were, I'd get a couple hours. A publicist would be hovering by,
Yeah.
escorting me out the second the time was up, trying to even censor the kinds of questions I would ask. But no, I was invited into their home, into the recording studio. It became a routine. The first time I met them, it was at a coffee house right near their house, and I sat there and we had coffee together. And John said something about, our lives are open. Ask us anything you want. And I took him up on it, and still didn't know what was gonna happen. But I was told the next day to meet them again in the morning at their apartment building, the Dakota in New York. I did that. We had breakfast in their kitchen, and then I went with them to the recording studio. And there was a routine that began that day that pretty much was how things went after that. I was with them every single day while they were recording Double Fantasy, and I watched them in the studio, and I watched them singing, and I watched John when we would come back to the apartment. John would rush home because he wanted to see his son Sean, who at the time was 4. And I was with them back at the apartment. I would go with Yoko down to her office, which was on the first floor of the Dakota. And as she was doing business and making phone calls and deciding, what record label to work with and all kinds of things like that, I sat there and I was like a fly on the wall for that as well. Um, and that went on for 3 weeks. And there was, it was amazing to be able to, it was amazing because of that much time. I was able to ask, everything I wanted to ask, able to do follow-ups, and also able to observe them in their, people have said that period of time they weren't getting along, or they were, even some people have speculated, they were on the way to a divorce, and they were, they put this public front on to, convince the public that everything was fine. If I'd been with them a couple hours, they might have been able to, fool me like that. But because I was with them every single day for so much time, I really saw them together all the time, and saw them individually as well. And I saw the truth. I saw what was going on in their relationship. I saw how much they cared about each other. I saw how much they were enjoying working together on their records. The one that became Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey is what they were working on at the time. And so, uh, 3 weeks was a good. I watched them record some of the great songs. I'll hear a song on the radio or something, and I'll be brought back to sitting in the recording studio in the corner on a director's chair that they gave me to watch them record, and John would be behind the glass control, in the control room. Yoko would be on the other side of the glass in front of a microphone singing over and over again. So it was really, really something. It was, again, I was really young, and so my mind was kind of blown. I mean, I was excited to be doing an interview for Playboy. I was excited to be on an expense account and staying in a really fancy hotel in
Yeah.
New York. And then I'm sitting with John and Yoko for all these weeks.
That's amazing. I mean, it very much, now that you like play it out like that, it has very much of the, almost famous movie, vibe
Gosh,
of the young Cameron Crowe, just all of a sudden thrown into this, which
it
is
really
so,
was. It really had that. I just read Cameron's Crowe's autobiography, which just came out this week, I think.
oh, cool.
And there was a lot of similarities. I mean, he was doing it. I was with John and Yoko. He was with David Bowie and Led Zeppelin, but it was very similar.
That's amazing. And so I would assume like even at the, as they were so gracious and kind at the front, at the beginning of it, that you were probably pretty nervous. I mean, was there a point where you kind of felt a little bit like more at ease? Like, okay, now I can settle in and really observe, really ask the questions. I don't know if that's day 4 or something like that.
Yeah, I was nervous for sure. I'd never, nothing like this. And it was also, this was, John and Yoko. I mean, they were bigger than life figures. And I had grown up, kind of obsessed with the Beatles and especially with John's solo music. I came to Yoko's music and art later, but I would sit across from them, and it was just so easy talking. And then all of a sudden, there was a moment where John was talking about a trip that he had taken at one point to Spain, to Almeria, Spain, and he was telling a story about it. And he said, "Oh, but while I was there, by the way, I wrote Strawberry Fields." And I was
Like,
like,
come on.
that's when the moment when I would be reminded, "Oh yeah, this is who I'm sitting here talking to." And so um, I was nervous, but because of how easy they were and how kind of gracious they were and how open they were, um, and funny and, just welcoming and all this stuff, the nervousness went away. And I think by, certainly by the end of the first week, it was much more casual at that point. And I also realized that I wasn't going to, I mean, the other thing is I went there with pages of questions that I'd prepared. And so there was at first some pressure I felt to get through as much as I could. But when I realized I was going to have a lot more time with them, I was able to relax in that way too, to realize that I could do a lot of follow up. I could listen to, I mean, we could talk a lot about any of the one, whether it was about one particular song of theirs or one particular.
Yeah, and I'm also struck by, I mean, they had every reason in the world, to be distrusting of whoever, you know what I mean? Like, as most people who are, like, uber famous, like, you gotta have a layer of protection just for yourself and your sanity, and it's kind of remarkable that they just seemed so willing to just so open and kind and bringing you in, and you didn't know them, it's not like or, you weren't their nephew. There were, it was like there's no reason beyond sort of a basic level of trust, and obviously you must have, had that coming out of you of like, you can trust me, like, you must not have seemed like you were going to be, make it a hatchet job or anything like that. And so but it's kind of amazing that because they were so famous, and there were so many people who were trying to get to them and critique them and all that. It's pretty
Yeah,
remarkable they were so trusting.
yeah, that it was remarkable that they were trusting like that. You're absolutely right, because it's not only that everybody wanted them, piece of them for sure, especially John, of course. I mean, think about the attention that he had since he was, so young when when the Beatles broke out. But they'd also been treated really poorly by the press. Yoko and John were really sort of vilified. She was vilified, especially in the early days when they got together. Um, and there were a lot of journalists who had written about them or portrayed them on, TV shows, whatever it was, really negatively. So that made it even more extraordinary that they were so open to a journalist coming in that they didn't know, as you point out, and trusting me. And maybe it was partly because, they maybe it was maybe it goes back to the tarot cards or something like that, and maybe it was just part of the vibe there. But also, I think a lot of it had to do with just who they were at that time of their lives. They were very, very content and very open, and they'd lived, this very quiet life when they had a child, weren't doing interviews, weren't making records. Yoko wasn't having art openings. They lived a life that was very different than anything they'd ever lived before, and it was really a revelation. I mean, John talks in the uh, book about, or in the interview about, little things that gave him more pleasure than getting all the gold records and platinum records that he'd gotten. Baking a loaf of bread and watching it come out of the oven. Having experience, teaching his young son to swim at the YMCA. I mean, things like that. So they were just in a really good space, and I think maybe that was partly why they were so open and so trusting.